My hands trembled as I packed the last of my things into the cardboard box. My co-workers watched in silence, some with pity, most with relief that it wasn't them. But the worst part? My boss didn't just fire me. She humiliated me, laughed as she did it, called me dead weight in front of the entire staff. What she didn't know was the man walking into that building in 15 minutes had a contract in his bag, and my name was on it. Chinara had worked at Aerotech for 5 full years. She was always the first person to arrive at the office and the last one to leave. She worked hard every single day, never complained, and always did what was asked of her. Her co-workers saw her as someone they could count on, quiet, calm, and very good at her job. But her boss, Madame Mosisi, barely noticed her. It was like Chinara didn't exist. Madame Mosisi only paid attention to people who spoke loudly, dressed expensively, and tried to impress her with fake smiles and office gossip. Chinara was different. She didn't like drama or showing off. She just came to do her work and go home. But in that kind of workplace, being humble made her look weak. Some people even took credit for her work because they knew she wouldn't speak up. Madame Mosisi never gave Chinara any praise, even when she did amazing work. She never promoted her or even thanked her. In meetings, Chinara's ideas were ignored, while others repeated them and got applause. Even though she helped her team quietly and kept everything running smoothly, no one really saw her effort, especially not the boss. To Madame Mosesi, Chinara was just one of those background workers. Not a star, not a favorite, just there. But Chinara didn't mind. She believed that one day, her hard work would speak for her. She kept going, even when it hurt. But deep down, she started to feel like no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough for people who refused to see her worth. And sadly, she had no idea that her silence and kindness would soon be used against her in the worst possible way. The office was unusually quiet that morning. Everyone sat stiffly in the meeting room, eyes glued to the large screen showing numbers and charts. It was the quarterly results presentation, the one that always made people nervous. Chinara had worked hard on her report. She had stayed up late for nights, making sure everything was correct. She didn't expect praise, but she at least hoped it would go smoothly. When it was her turn to present, she stood up with her usual calmness. She spoke clearly, explaining the progress and numbers with simple points. For a moment, it seemed like everything was going well. But then, in the middle of her explanation, Madame Mosisi raised her hand sharply. "Enough," she said, her voice cold and loud. The room fell completely silent. Everyone stared. "You're clearly not leadership material," she added with a smirk, as if Chinara had said something foolish. Chinara's lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. Before she could even ask, Madame Mosisi stood up, pointed straight at her, and said, "You're fired. Pack your desk and leave by lunch." The words hit like a slap. There was no warning, no private talk, no explanation, just loud public humiliation in front of the entire staff. Some people gasped. Others looked down at their notepads, pretending not to hear. No one moved. No one spoke up for her. Chinara stood frozen. Her heart was beating too fast. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to cry, but her tears wouldn't come. She just stared at the floor, trying to keep her balance as her whole world shifted under her feet. It didn't feel real. After all her years of hard work and loyalty, this was how it ended. Like a scene from a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was cruel. Chinara walked slowly to the restroom, her eyes burning, her legs weak like they could give out any moment. As soon as she closed the door behind her, she turned the lock and leaned against the wall. The moment she was finally alone, her body dropped to the floor. That's when the tears came, deep, painful sobs that had been stuck inside her chest. She cried not just because she lost her job, but because of how it happened. It wasn't just being fired. It was the shame. The way Madame Mosisi had done it like she was nothing, like all her years meant nothing. She remembered the nights she stayed at the office long after everyone else had gone home. She remembered skipping weekends with friends, ignoring family dinners, even working during her mother's funeral. Yes, her own mother's funeral. She didn't take a proper break because the company needed her. And now, just like that, they threw her out like trash. The pain was too much to carry. She cried into her hands, hoping no one would hear her from outside the door. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost ignored it, but something told her to check. Her fingers, still shaking, unlocked the screen. It was a message, just a few words. "Are you ready for 2 p.m.? KN. She stared at it, confused at first. Then her eyes widened. KN. Those initials. She knew who it was. Her heart skipped. The message was simple, but powerful. She read it again, and then again, and slowly her tears began to stop. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt. That message, it reminded her that this wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, everything was happening for a reason. She stood up, took a deep breath, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was tired, red from crying, but her eyes had a new spark. She didn't know exactly what would happen at 2 p.m., but she knew one thing now. Her story wasn't over. It was just getting started. Months before everything fell apart at work, Chinara had attended a business conference in the city. It was one of those events where people dressed in sharp suits, carried fancy notepads, and smiled only when necessary. Chinara almost didn't go. She wasn't someone who liked crowds or small talk, but something inside her told her to go that day. She wore her simple blue dress, carried her old bag, and hoped to just learn something new and maybe meet someone kind. That's when she met him, Kanyisa and Lovu. He didn't walk around with a big group or act like he was too important to talk to anyone. He was calm, polite, and had a warm smile that made her feel seen. They ended up sitting next to each other during a panel discussion about workplace culture. After the session, they started talking. What was supposed to be a short chat turned into a deep conversation that lasted hours. They sat in a quiet corner of the venue, sipping coffee and sharing their thoughts. Chinara spoke from her heart about how workers should be treated with respect, how leaders should listen more and speak less, how people in offices are more than just numbers. She didn't hold back. She told him how broken systems silence hard-working people and how she believed kindness could be a strong leadership tool. Most people never cared when she said these things before, but Kanyisa listened closely, nodding with interest. When she finished, he looked at her and said, "I invest in people, not just profit. If I ever buy into your company, you'll be the first person I call." She laughed softly, thinking he was just being nice. She thanked him, but deep down, she didn't believe anything would come from it. He was probably rich, powerful, and surrounded by people with better connections. She was just a quiet worker trying to stay afloat. But that moment stayed in her heart, like a seed planted in secret. She didn't know it then, but that one conversation, that one night, was about to change everything. Chinara walked slowly toward the lobby, carrying a plain cardboard box filled with the pieces of her work life. Her water bottle, a photo of her late mother, some files, and a small plant she had taken care of for years. Her eyes were still red from crying in the restroom, but she held her head high. People turned to look at her, whispering behind her back, acting like they didn't know what had just happened. Some felt sorry, some didn't care, but Chinara kept walking, step by step, ready to leave the place that had broken her spirit. Just as she reached the center of the lobby, the elevator doors behind her made a loud ding. She turned around slowly, not expecting anything, and then her breath caught. Out of the elevator stepped Kanyisa and Lovu. He wasn't alone. Behind him were smartly dressed lawyers, assistants carrying documents, and members of the company's board. The room went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. People stopped moving. They stared. Madame Mosesi, who had been standing near the front desk, blinked in confusion. She looked nervous. Who are you?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Kanyisa stepped forward calmly with a confident smile. He looked around the lobby like he owned it, because now he did. "Good afternoon," he said warmly but clearly. "I'm the new majority owner of Aerotech." Gasps filled the air. Chinara froze, clutching her box tightly. "And," Kanyisa continued, turning toward her, "I'd like to have a word, especially with Miss Chinara." Every eye in the room swung to her. Her, the woman who was just fired an hour ago? The one everyone ignored? Mosesi's face turned pale. Chinara stood there in shock, trying to understand what was happening. Was this real? It was. Chinara couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen in place, her heart beating fast. Was this real? Was Kanyisa really standing here, calling her name in front of everyone after what had just happened? Her mind was spinning. She held onto her box tighter, as if afraid it might all disappear like a dream. Kanyisa didn't stop. He turned to the group of board members who had followed him in. With calm confidence, he reached into a folder and pulled out a thick document. Holding it up so everyone could see, he said, "This is my proposal for structural reform at Aerotech. Things are going to change, and for the better." He looked around the room. Some of the board members nodded quietly. Staff members standing nearby looked confused and curious. Then Chinara added, loud and clear, "And to lead that change, I've chosen someone who truly understands this company, someone who has worked from the ground up and who values people over politics." He turned to Chinara again, smiling. "That person is Miss Chinara. I'm appointing her as my chief operations liaison during this transition." Gasps filled the air. People looked at each other in shock. Chinara? The same Chinara who was just fired? The same one they never really noticed? Mosesi forced a nervous laugh. She stepped forward quickly and said, "Wait, what? Her? But she's not even—" Her words were shaky. She was clearly losing control of the moment. But Chinara raised one hand to stop her. He looked directly at her with calm but firm eyes. "You just fired your company's future," he said. "But thankfully, I just hired her back." The silence that followed was powerful. No one laughed. No one whispered. All eyes were on Chinara. She felt tears rising again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from shock, from disbelief, from hope. She hadn't even gotten the chance to walk out the door, and now she was being offered a leadership role by the man who now owned the company. Her co-workers looked at her differently now. They didn't see just the quiet girl anymore. They saw someone who had been working hard in the background all along, someone who had earned respect, even if it had come late. Chinara took a deep breath. She wasn't invisible anymore. Soon after Chinara took control, he asked for a full investigation into the company. He wanted to understand what had really been happening behind the scenes. With his support, a proper internal audit began. The team went deep into the company files, emails, and staff complaints. What they found shocked everyone, but not Chinara. It turned out Madame Mosesi had been hiding a lot. She had dismissed several employees unfairly, not because they did bad work, but because they refused to play her office politics. She had also been changing numbers in the company budget, using money for things that had nothing to do with the company's progress. Worse, she had ignored serious complaints from workers, complaints about stress, mistreatment, and overwork. She had made people feel small and powerless, but there was more. Chinara, during her time in the company, had been quietly reporting these issues. She had kept records, written detailed reports, and sent them through the right channels. But Mosesi had buried them. She made sure no one ever saw them. She made Chinara look like just a quiet worker with no real voice. But now, those very reports became the key evidence. Chinara and his team used Chinara's documents to show just how deep the problems had gone. The office was buzzing with surprise. People who once overlooked Chinara now began to understand who she really was. She wasn't just a quiet lady who worked late. She had been fighting for everyone, even when no one knew. She had seen the unfairness, and instead of gossiping or complaining, she tried to fix it the right way. Staff who once walked past her without a word now came to her with respect. They started calling her a hero, someone who had protected their dignity without asking for praise. They realized that Chinara had always been on their side, working quietly but powerfully, and now her truth had finally come to light. The next morning, Chinara called for a full staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the large conference room. There was a strange silence in the air. People didn't know what to expect. Some looked nervous, others curious. Chinara sat quietly near the back, her heart beating fast. Chinara stood at the front with a calm but serious face. He held a thick file in his hands, the results from the internal audit. Slowly, he began to speak. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was clear. He talked about the unfair treatment of staff, the missing funds, the ignored complaints, and how the workplace had been made toxic. He gave examples, real ones, and everything pointed back to one person, Madame Mosesi. Mosesi sat stiffly in her chair, trying to keep a straight face, but it was clear she was shaken. She looked around, hoping someone would defend her. No one moved. Then, Chinara paused, looked straight at her, and said the words that sent shock through the room. Effective immediately, your services are no longer needed at Aerotech. You're free to pack your desk by lunch. The entire room went quiet. The same sentence Mosesi had shouted at Chinara in front of everyone was now being used on her. But this time, it wasn't out of pride or power. It was justice. Fair justice. People stared, but no one said a word. No one begged for her. No one clapped either. They just sat there, letting the truth settle in. Mosesi stood up slowly. Her hands shook as she picked up her handbag. She didn't say anything. She didn't even look at Chinara. She simply walked out, knowing the same humiliation she had once caused had returned to her. But now, it wasn't cruel. It was deserved. The tables had truly turned. After Mosesi was told to leave, she hesitated near the door. Her face was pale, and her voice shook as she tried to speak. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to," she stammered, looking at Chinara with a mix of regret and fear. It was clear she wanted to explain herself, maybe even ask for forgiveness. But Chinara didn't answer with anger or insults. She didn't yell or try to make Mosesi feel small like she had done to her. Instead, Chinara stood tall and calm, with quiet strength. She looked Mosesi straight in the eyes and said, "You never needed to know who I was. You just needed to respect that I existed." Those words were simple but powerful. They held a deep meaning. Chinara was telling everyone watching that respect is basic. It doesn't depend on being loud, flashy, or important. It is about seeing people as human beings, no matter who they are. Chinara didn't cry. She didn't beg or show sadness. She walked away with her head held high. In that moment, she was not a victim or a defeated employee. She was a woman who had won without revenge, a person who chose dignity over anger. Everyone in the room felt the weight of her words. Some wiped their eyes, others looked thoughtful. The message was clear. True strength comes from grace and respect, not from putting others down. Chinara's courage showed that sometimes the greatest victory is to rise above the hurt and walk forward with pride. She didn't need to prove herself by fighting back. Her silence and poise said it all. She taught everyone that kindness and strength can shine brighter than humiliation and cruelty. As she left the room, whispers spread. People were inspired. They understood that real respect means treating every person with kindness, even when it's hard. Chinara's story was no longer just about losing a job or being fired. It was about standing up for yourself in the most powerful way possible, with grace. Months later, the company looked very different. In the main hallway, there was a new leadership wall, and right in the center was Chinara's photo. It was a proud moment, not just for her, but for everyone who had watched her journey. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a leader who had changed the whole company for the better. Chinara didn't rule with anger or revenge. Instead, she brought kindness and real change. She introduced mental health days, giving workers time to rest and take care of themselves when they needed it. She started an open-door HR policy so anyone could talk about their problems without fear. She also created a mentorship program, helping younger employees grow and feel supported, something she had wished for when she was just starting out. Her leadership was about healing the wounds left by the old ways. People felt seen and respected now. The office felt like a place where everyone mattered, no matter how quiet or simple they seemed. One evening, Chinara stood on the rooftop, looking out over the city she had once felt invisible in. The lights sparkled below, and she felt a deep sense of peace. She smiled quietly to herself and whispered, "They tried to erase me, but now they print my name on every door." Those words were her victory. From being ignored and humiliated, she had become a symbol of strength and change. Chinara didn't just survive, she thrived. She showed that when you lead with heart and purpose, you don't just win a job or a title, you inspire a whole community and write a new chapter, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. If you believe everyone deserves respect and a second chance, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that inspire and empower, because your story could be next. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been overlooked but proved everyone wrong? Let's talk.